going through and making would all be the same kind of puzzle game. I mean, traditionally, and even like in the industry as well as in indie terms, and I've experienced both environments, you're always going to want to develop on existing tech. It's the best and it's the quicker way than trying to prototype something from the ground up. So, in your experience, if you're building stuff on the same tech over and over and over, your first 10%, your prototyping phase would really be the ideal phase where you have that tech there waiting for you and it's only a matter of iterating on it more and improving it. Maybe spending some time working on the tools as well.
It changes a lot from project to project, but I really think of it as the interesting 10%, whether it's constrained or not. You know, the unconstrained ones usually it ends up being this false 10%. But if the project has a constraint, it's like, okay, I got this afternoon to throw an idea down, and it's really just, you know, like an oil painter will do a charcoal sketch to get the values right before they start laying down some serious oil paints, and you know, putting a lot of time into something that, you know, if you put 2 hours of artwork into a feature that you decide you're not actually going to put in your game, which on a big game that scales out to like, you don't want to put 2 months into artwork for an area that you're just going to go, oh, we're not doing the caves in this game anymore. You know, that's like, that's what I get to sink my time into, because I know like I'm going to do a 2D thing, it's probably going to be a Flash thing, and I have all my tools for that. What I'm really testing is, you know, what is the reasonable scope of this thing? Is it going to be fun if I only do like 2 levels, or is it actually going to be fun if there's only one kind of enemy? And you know, quick tests to verify that, you know, the kind of scope that I can handle is going to make something that I'm going to be happy with. And the projects that don't get done are the ones that's like, okay, I did it at the scope I can handle, and it sucks. So I'm going to either wait until I can handle the larger scope, or I'm going to just, you know, let it sit and figure out if there's, you know, if it can mutate later into something that has the right scope and is fun.
And what would you guys say the last 10% is? Because we've established the first 10% is everything. So what's left of the last 10%?
I sort of think the last 10% is dealing with all the issues from making bad choices in the first 10%. And that happens more often than you think. I think that if you've got the perfect storm where you don't understand your tech, you don't have a strong design before you go into production, that ends up with definitely the worst 10%, which usually drags out to become the last 50% because you've got just had 40% more time of your project to try and fix those things. Yeah, that would be a bit for me.
Probably more of the same, yeah. I mean, I think in the case of the first and last 10%, there's an ideal that we would all love to have, and then there's the reality, which is very different. And in most cases, the last 10% can be anywhere from getting to beta and dumping the entire asset range into the game so that it's a otherwise complete product to show to whoever it is that you're showing to. But frame rate goes out the window and you have no end to the problems. Or you could be looking at something that's quite resolved, but it has a few incredibly exotic A-list bugs that are hanging around in there, and you've got every programmer on the team running after them with big butterfly nets, and nobody can get their hands on it, and you have teams of QA people trying to isolate this incredibly exotic, rarely seen bug that you know is in there and is a memory leak or something really nasty, and you can't ship with that in there. And this is how the last 10%, I guess, can turn into the last 20%, or the last 30%, or the last 130%.
For us, it's been a matter of accepting the fact that we can no longer iterate and no longer add to the game. There's no more mechanics being added, there's no more levels, and I cry a little bit inside, but accept the fact that the game has to be out for Christmas and we're only about 6 weeks away. So we suddenly kick into like insane amount of QA, insane amount of like massaging just the tiniest details and trying to get the levels just right, and final kind of play testing and stuff like that. And in between the cracks of the programmers fixing all the bugs, because it's generally them that have to deal with them, try and slip in just like the occasional little tweak task. But you don't get too many in, so it's kind of like the realization as well that you might have missed the boat on a lot of those little tweak things that you kind of had wanted to get in the game, but they're always so small that you never really bothered to put them onto like a list or really force them in anyway. So then I started trying to do them myself. But yeah, that's not a good idea. So yeah, then just the insane amount of QA and just trying to get it out really, like trying to get the date and crunching. So we actually do crunch a lot in our last 10%. So much more than any other period, just because you realize just how much there is to go to get there. The 10% seems to always take the longest.
I think it's tricky when you're having to like basically choose between do we you know, put all of our effort into, like I feel like there's two piles that are both made up of like 1,000 tiny tasks, and one is like optional, aesthetic, passionate, like efforts of love, and then the other is like actual required, like pedantic, oh this crashes on half the devices it's supposed to be running on, etc. And it's really, really hard to choose one over the other. But for me, like the fake last 10% for me is always trying to decide if the game should have an ending, because I haven't gotten that far yet. I've been doing the art and the gameplay, it's like, this is rad, and I'm like, oh, it should probably end. And usually I just don't. Like, oh, it'll have a high score table instead. And like, but that's not really the last 10%, even when you're doing Flash games, which don't have QA usually, because whatever, the Flash games. And you know, they don't usually, you don't have like the CRTs, or not CRTs, but like the big giant checklist from Microsoft that's like 60% of your dev time is spent just satisfying like the game doesn't work.
The Nintendo one is much, much worse.
Yeah. Well, it's also like if they hold power and reset while your game is saving, then the data gets corrupted and oh, you know, insane corner cases. We don't have that stuff, but what you do have with a Flash game is, unless you have like a dedicated PR person or a dedicated marketing person or something like that, you have a whole bucket of weird efforts that aren't part of your game design from the beginning. It's like, oh, we need to incorporate the high score API for like all three of the major popular portals where I'm going to get the vast majority of my traffic. So okay, now I'll put that stuff in, and oh, now I have to actually go through and upload it everywhere, and then I need to make sure that I get it up on my blog, and I need to make sure this thing's connected here, and that everybody who's involved with it knows that it's happening, and the musician's going to like co-promote it over on his thing, and there's this whole huge, especially when you're a small group or a small studio where you're wearing a lot of hats, there is this, Cannonball took 5 days to make and put it out there, and I spent like 2 weeks of steady work just messing with hosting and designing a new page for it and putting out another version that did this and trying to do some advertising to pay for massive server overages and trying to, talk to people on portals and see what they wanted on there. And it was like, that was the last 80% of the project or something. It was just all of this weird overhead that was actually after the game was done and released and people were playing it. Like it existed, and it was this whole other huge chunk of work that is like, that's what I think of our last 10% as now. Is it's not even part of the game. Like the game is completely done, and there's all this crazy, weird, like meta maintenance.
So I should just say, like it isn't all doom and gloom in the last 10%. I mean, even when you have all those exotic bugs flying around in there and whatever problems are there, usually that is the time where much of the art team gets in there, fills with all the lighting and gets it, and they have that little space of room to breathe right at the end there where they can just go back through, iron it all out. The whole thing is no longer open on the operating table. It's had all of its visits put back in, it's sewed up. And even when people are running around screaming and saying, oh, geez, we've got to ship, there's still quite a lot of beautification going on. And that is the time where you really see the game come to life. And you've already seen it looking and playing like a game at that point. But I think that's usually the point where you can really look at it and go, fuck yeah.
When you don't have to actively imagine the missing pieces. Like you sit there playing it and you catch yourself playing it because it's kind of fun and you're actually playing it and you're not testing anymore. And it's like, oh my god, I was having fun.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And then it crashes and you go, oh.
I was just having fun. It's brief, but it's just there.
guys ready for some questions? Okay, who'd like to ask a question? Okay.
I've got a question for Nathan. You said that you'd like the pre-production to be able to be even the first 50%. And this applies also to the last 10%, that if you have parts that are going on for so long, especially in a big team, how do you maintain motivation and keep people from getting burnt out?
That's a good question. There's running a big team in a pre-production phase just doesn't work. You need to have a really small, light team running fast. Ideally, really motivated guys who can quick iterate. And I think that one of the things that happens is, you know, like you were saying, when you get, actually, no, sorry, what Simon was saying, you get to the end of a project and everybody goes, holy shit, we're not going to get this shipped. All right, pile everybody into it. And the pre-production phase gets eaten up there. And you get to the end of it and you end up with the whole team sitting there going, okay, pre-production, let's make some stuff. But having a really small light team means you can do that iteration really, really quickly. You can get feedback really, really quickly. You can get it out to people to play test, all that sort of thing. And making that decision that whatever you're making is either white box or it's a visual, like a key visual style that you're aiming for, and trying to keep those two things separate. So you have a couple of, you might have from an art point of view, you might have a bunch of guys doing some level stuff and making sure that it's absolutely white box, you can't be confused for anything else. And then you have a bunch of other guys going, okay, this is the visual style we're going for, and we just keep on iterating on this till we get what we want. And then when it comes to production, you go, okay, let's join these two things together. And that way, we're not going to end up in a situation where you spend a whole chunk of time, building up a white box finished artwork, only to know that it's going to get out the door and you're never actually going to use it. I think from a motivational point of view, it's having that really fast iteration is the motivation, because you see cool stuff happening, you go, wow, you can climb a wall now. You can do that yesterday, you know. And if you had a big team trying to keep that together, you would be able to do it.
Who would like to ask a question? Okay.
So for Nathan at Israel, do you work on the same projects as the other team in the US? Like, are you working on Dead Space 2?
We have distributed development. Seems to be the new way of doing things.
And I guess how do you stay in communication hard between different time zones?
Too many video conferences, basically. There's a lot of communication going back and forth. They tend to work on the situation we're working with is there's a couple of key guys over in at the Shores, and then there's our team back here, and then there's another external team over in Shanghai, all in our studio. And we bounce stuff back and forth. And it is a fairly new way of working, even within Israel. But logistically, it can be a nightmare, especially with time zones and everything else. And the main way of keeping tabs on what everybody else is doing is everybody's playing the same build. We get, the feedback loop is very, very, very short, so there's no confusion. But it definitely has its challenges. Ideally, if you can have everybody in one place, working on the one thing, and you would be able to iterate even faster, but that's just not how the structure works.
You had a question?
Yeah. There's always a real problem with that first 10%. You show it, and then you always have that one manager who says, "Well, it's practically ready to ship then, right?" That's 90%, right? And is there any trick that you guys know of where you can make it clear to someone that yes, I know it looks awesome. Yes, you can run on the wall, but only on that wall. This is definitely a prototype. This is only 10%.
That's always there, but the first 10% is going to get strangled in the cot if you have that kind of person at the helm. And if you do have that kind of person at the helm, then that's a bit unfortunate. And there really is no way around that other than lots of placating and just doing the job as best as you damn well can. As we were saying before at the start, there is an